that's Carla, and welcome back to my channel, Written Word Calligraphy. Today is going to be part of my calligraphy business series of videos, and we're going to be chatting all about pricing. Pricing is such a sensitive topic, and people ask me about pricing all the time, but I wanted to answer one of the questions that people have been asking me a lot. Is like, Carla, how do you price yourself? And I must say, in calligraphy, in the calligraphy world, at least for myself, based on my experience all this time of, doing lots of different kinds of services, there are about 5 ways that you can price yourself by, and that way you can consider it because it really depends on every situation. I realized that there's really no one formula to every single project because it really depends on yourself, like your amount of time you have, the amount, how difficult it could be. But these are 5 ways I've used to price myself and what type of service or product it works better for. So the first one is hourly rate. So the hourly rate is something that you can set for yourself, and it's the amount that you would pay per hour. So that really is applicable only to certain amounts of things. So for example, for events, I find events a very effective place to do an hourly rate for, because you're physically having to be at a place, and those for a certain amount of time. And usually when they ask you to come, it's usually with a certain amount of time. And they also can't tell you how many pieces are going to be really written during this time. They can give you a ballpark amount. So it's rather hard to price per item. And also because you can't tell whether or not the event is going to have multiple people coming in or not at all. So if, I find at least that hourly rates for events are great because that way it covers all your bases. If it's not a lot of people, then that's great for you. If it's a lot of people, then you're getting paid about the amount of work that you're doing, right? So you'd want to consider for sure how difficult it would be, how much the average number of people that would be asking you to do some work, how much time it takes you to do a certain product. For example, engraving takes a lot longer than calligraphy. Writing names, for example. So you'd want to budget that into coming up with your hourly rate, like how much you would want to be paid per hour. So I think generally events are great for that. And then of course, number 2 is projects. So this has to do with giving yourself a rate per project depending on that difficulty. So I like to personally do a project ballpark amounts, one chunk of an amount per project on workshops, because that way it's not dependent on the number of students, and it's dependent on my teaching time and effort. And because I generally have a sense of how many hours it takes for me to work on the actual content itself, then the actual day itself when I'm teaching it. So it's like a teaching fee, this full one big banana that has everything in it, the amount of time to prep, the materials I need to do in order to create the slides, and then the actual me talking and speaking, just like what I'm doing right now. So like a teaching fee, essentially. I find it really good for workshops, especially for, say, private workshops and things like that. And that way, when I'm calculating it per person, because usually for some workshops you calculate it per person, then you know that this is the base fee that you'll need to be earning for this event to happen. So, and that way you can price it per student afterwards. But this does help. For example, if it's a virtual event where there's a lot of students all over the world watching you, but then it's harder to price it per student, but at least you can say that by my fee, the amount of time and effort for me to teach these students is still the same, and that way you have one fee for it versus per student. In the actual workshops though, I generally do charge per student, in-person workshops, because of the supplies that they have, but I have a minimum for myself that this is the number of students we need to get in order for me to teach at all. If I only had 1 student, I'll try to have to move them to another day, or we'll have to cancel this workshop if we're just not have enough minimum. So this would be your minimum fee that you'd need in order to teach, because the amount of work and effort that you put into teaching can be quite a lot too. For example, teaching is not that natural for myself. So it might take me a lot more time to prepare or create new content than somebody who has teaching as their like natural skill. So it really depends, and of course I want you to be paid what you're worth, and so that's how one way you can price yourself with. And the third one has to do with per square footage. And so this one really, it has to do with like larger pieces of artwork. For example, like a mural. Like I find that that's a really effective way to charge the amount of work, because you don't know sometimes how long it's going to take you for you to do it. So hourly rate might not be the best bet. Project fee might be a good one too, but again, you don't know, like the difficulty increases as the size increases. So the per square foot might be a good way to go about it. Like you still might have like a minimum though. Like for example, you're not gonna go and give that exact same price for a small square foot. 1 square foot, that's not gonna work. It has to be like say a minimum of say like 10 square feet, and this is the price that it's going to be. But at least having that as like a range to provide your client will give them a better sense of what that pricing could be. So that's one way you could to go about it, especially if you're doing like big pieces of artwork. Because yeah, like you just don't know exactly sometimes like how difficult things are going to be. So a per square footage fee might be a good way to go about like pricing yourself. And the fourth one has to do with difficulty. So this is probably the one I use the most, especially with regard to wedding invitations. So wedding invitations is still a combination of lots of different fees put together, but difficulty is one of the ways that I charge for my services, because sometimes, for example, like the watercolor illustrations are a lot harder to do, or take a lot more time to do than doing line illustrations, because it's just you have to paint and you have to wait for things to dry for it to work. And so whenever I price my wedding invitations, it does vary depending on the amount of time it would take for me to do them. So there's a little bit of an hourly rate to it, plus the difficulty level, and of course like the materials and things like that kind of molded into it. But that really helps, that affects it. And that way, not every single invitation has the same price. It has to do with the amount of work involved in order to make that happen. And of course, there's the per item fee. So these ones are great for like the smaller things. So for example, an envelope addressing, you shouldn't charge per hour, because you don't know exactly how many you can do in an hour, depending on the envelope and paper. And also sometimes you need to take a break. So hourly rates might not work for that, but per item, it works. Or like a seating chart, for example, you shouldn't do a square footage one, because you would still probably have a different square footage depending on how large they want it to be written. And so it's better to have them per item, and then you can roll in like mistakes and like the time involved into that per item fee. And that way, like when you're pricing it, it's a lot more like visible and fair versus like a seating chart fee, because people can't like identify how many names is that, like how much does that cover. Like if it's less difficult, does it make it less of a fee? No. At least if it's like, okay, this is the number of names that you'll need in order to make this fee, in order to make this seating chart, that's how much it would take. And of course, on top of that is like the rental for the actual piece and things like that. So you'll have to have those things like ready and prepped, and of course roll in like the setup and like mistakes and all that kind of stuff into your per item fee. So those are my 5 ways that I use to price my items. Like I said, and I've shared with you some of those examples. Not everything kind of fits in the right bucket. If you have any questions at all about this, or maybe you'd want to pick my brain on like how to price a certain item, write it in the comments below, and I'd love to get back to you. Or you can write me a DM at Written Word Calligraphy. I would love to be able to provide my insight, or maybe I have priced something like that and I could help you out in that sense. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you guys in another video.